r/NoSleep. The Hospital of Unanswered Prayers. There's a hospital on the outskirts of town that no one dares mention. It looms at the edge of an old road that even GPS systems avoid, covered in mist most days, hidden beneath layers of ivy and decay. St. Mary's Mercy, the sign out front still reads, but time has erased most of the letters, leaving only a faint impression of what it once was. People say the hospital closed decades ago, long before my time, but whenever you ask someone about it, their expressions change. Lips tighten, eyes darken, and they'll always tell you to stay far, far away. But the ad I saw said otherwise. Night shift security needed. Immediate start. High pay. Strict rules apply. That was it. No details about the hospital's current state, no contact information. Just an address I vaguely recognized as belonging to St. Mary's. I laughed when I first saw it. There was no way anyone worked there, right? And yet, something gnawed at me. Bills don't wait, and my financial situation had become desperate. I needed a job, any job, and this seemed like the universe offering me one last shot. So, against my better judgment, I applied. When I called the number provided, a woman's voice answered. It was unsettlingly calm, flat, and devoid of emotion. "You're calling about the position?" I hesitated. "Yes, I'd like to apply." There was a pause on the other end, long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. Then, finally, "Be there tonight. 9 p.m. sharp. Don't be late. Don't leave early." And then the line went dead. That was it. No formalities, no questions about experience, just a chilling demand. Still, the promise of high pay kept me grounded. I decided to push away the unease and prepare myself. I didn't want to think too much about it, because if I did, I knew I'd back out. As I pulled up to the hospital, the air around me thickened with a palpable unease. The windows of the building were dark, but I could have sworn I saw figures move behind the cracked glass. The parking lot was empty, save for one old, beaten-up truck. I parked and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the place pressing down on me. The sign on the door was barely visible, the once proud red cross faded to a rusty brown. I glanced at my phone. 8:59 p.m. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me immediately. Damp rot, mixed with something sickly sweet, like flowers left too long in a vase. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. The reception desk was abandoned, covered in a layer of dust that made it look like no one had set foot in here for years. Suddenly, a man stepped out from a side room, startling me. He was old, with sagging skin that clung to his bones, his eyes hidden in the deep shadows of his face. Without a word, he handed me a sheet of paper and walked away, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as he had appeared. I looked down at the paper, my hands trembling slightly. The heading read, "Rules for Night Shift Security." There were only 8 rules, but each was more unnerving than the last. Rules for Night Shift Security. 1. Arrive at 9 p.m. sharp. Do not leave before 6 a.m., no matter what happens. 2. Check the security cameras every 30 minutes. If you see a patient in room 304, do not acknowledge them. 3. You will hear knocking at the front doors after midnight. Do not open them, no matter how desperate it sounds. 4. At exactly 1:15 a.m., the emergency lights will flicker. Close your eyes and count to 10. Do not open them early, and do not look in the mirrors during this time. 5. If the phone rings, answer it. If it rings more than once, hang up immediately. 6. A nurse in white may approach you around 2 a.m. She will ask for help with the patients. Politely decline and stay seated. 7. Do not enter the basement under any circumstances. 8. At 5:45 a.m., you will hear voices over the PA system, though the system is long broken. Listen carefully, but do not respond. Leave when they stop. My mouth went dry. These weren't normal instructions, they read like the script of a horror film. But as much as my gut screamed at me to leave, I needed the money. I folded the paper and shoved it in my pocket, bracing myself for a long night. The first few hours were quiet, almost peaceful in a way that made my skin crawl. I checked the cameras every half hour, like the rules instructed. Most of the feeds were dead, static-filled screens showing nothing but darkness. But room 304, the camera for that room was different. Every time I checked it, the bed looked like it had just been vacated, the sheets disturbed, the outline of a person still faintly visible. But the room was always empty. By midnight, I was on edge. Then the knocking started. Faint at first, but growing louder with each passing second, like someone pounding on the front doors with increasing desperation. I stood frozen at the security desk, staring at the monitor, watching the dark outline of the door. The knocking didn't stop. I clenched my fists, knuckles turning white. "Do not open the doors," I reminded myself, over and over. My heart hammered in my chest as the sound became deafening. And then, just like that, it stopped. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from my body, but I knew the night was far from over. At 1:15 a.m., the lights flickered. I clenched my eyes shut, immediately starting to count. The rules had said to count to 10, but it felt like an eternity. When I opened them, everything looked normal, except for one thing. The mirror on the wall beside the security desk. It was fogged, like someone had breathed against the glass. And in that fog, there was a single word, scrawled hastily: "Leave." I didn't move. The nurse came at 2 a.m., just as the rules had predicted. She looked normal enough at first. Just a tired woman in an old-fashioned white uniform. But something about her didn't feel right. She was too still, her movements too mechanical. She approached the desk, her face pale under the dim lighting, and smiled, though the smile never reached her eyes. "I need help with the patients," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "I'm sorry, I can't," I replied, trying to sound polite, as the rules instructed. Her smile faded, and for a moment, her face twitched, just a slight, jerking motion, but it was enough to send a wave of nausea rolling through me. She turned without another word and walked back into the shadows. At 5:45 a.m., the voices over the PA system began. A soft, unintelligible murmur at first, but then, slowly, the words became clearer. They were whispering my name. I held my breath, listening as the voices grew louder, more insistent. They were calling to me, beckoning me to the basement. My feet itched to move, but I stayed rooted to my chair, every muscle in my body locked in place. When the voices finally stopped, the silence was almost worse. The second night was worse. Room 304 had a patient this time. A pale figure lying still in the bed, their chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The knocking at the door was louder, more frantic. The lights flickered longer, and when I opened my eyes, the mirror wasn't just fogged, it was cracked, a spider web of fractures spreading across the glass. And then, at 2 a.m., the nurse didn't just ask for help. She reached out for me. Her cold fingers brushed my arm, and I pulled away, my heart racing. "Help me," she whispered, her voice no longer flat, but desperate. I shook my head, backing away from the desk. Her eyes. They were black. Completely black. She screamed, a blood-curdling, ear-piercing shriek that echoed through the halls. And then she was gone. I didn't make it to the third night. When I woke up this morning, there was a note on my nightstand. The same paper with the rules, but there was something new scrawled at the bottom in shaky handwriting. "You didn't follow the rules. We'll be seeing you soon." I tried to dismiss it as a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by lack of sleep. I had quit after the second night and hadn't heard from the hospital since. I convinced myself that nothing could come of it. But now, as I sit here writing this, I hear knocking on my front door. It's 2 a.m. And the nurse. She's waiting outside. I tried to ignore it, telling myself over and over that it wasn't real. But the knocking persisted. Louder. More insistent. Every rap on the door sent chills down my spine, and my body felt paralyzed with fear. I knew I couldn't open the door. I had to follow the rules, even though I wasn't at St. Mary's anymore. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling, and looked at the time. 2:05 a.m. The knocking stopped. I sat there in silence, my heart racing, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for the next thing to happen. Was she gone? Was I safe? Then I heard it, a scraping sound from behind me. Like something dragging across the floor. I turned slowly, terrified of what I might see. There, standing in the middle of my living room, was the nurse. Her face was twisted, no longer human. Her eyes were black voids, and her mouth hung open in a grotesque smile, showing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Her white uniform was stained with dark, wet patches, and her fingers, long and bony, reached out for me. "You didn't follow the rules," she rasped, her voice a horrible mixture of fury and glee. I backed away, my mind racing. The rules. I had to follow the rules. But I was at home. The rules didn't apply here, did they? She stepped closer, her feet dragging across the floor, her movements stiff and jerky. "You didn't follow the rules," she repeated, louder this time, her voice echoing through my apartment. I was trapped. The nurse was only a few feet away now, and I had no way out. Then, I remembered the last rule. The voices over the PA. They had told me to listen but never to respond. Maybe I had to listen to her now. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I didn't mean to break the rules." The nurse stopped. Her eyes narrowed, and her head tilted to the side, as if she was considering my words. "You didn't follow the rules," she said again, her voice softer now, almost sad. "I didn't mean to," I said again, more confidently this time. "Please. What do you want from me?" The nurse's smile faded. She opened her mouth to speak, but instead of words, a horrible, guttural sound came out, a mixture of sobbing and screaming. Her face contorted, and for a brief moment, I saw something human in her eyes. Pain. Anguish. "I didn't follow the rules either," she whispered, before vanishing into thin air, leaving only the faint scent of decay behind. It's been a week since that night. The nurse hasn't returned, but I know she's still out there, waiting. I've followed every rule, every instruction, since then. I don't answer the door after midnight. I don't look in mirrors when the lights flicker. I don't acknowledge the whispers I hear in the dark. Because now I know, St. Mary's Mercy isn't just a hospital. It's a place of unfinished business, of broken promises and unanswered prayers. And once you break the rules, it never lets you go. I've learned to live with the fear, to adapt. But I know, deep down, that one day, I'll break a rule again. And when that happens, I won't survive the next visit. The knocking starts again. And this time, it won't stop.